Good afternoon and welcome to today's Government Affairs Forum. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Today, from our nation's capital, we welcome Chairman Richard Neal, United States Congressman, and our featured speaker. The chairman has been a proven leader on the federal level where he advocates for the unique needs of our state and our country. And amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Chairman Neal helped lead the way to bring relief to the American people, including passing the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. We're looking forward to hearing more about the chairman's work. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page shortly after the presentation. And please be sure to submit your questions through the webinar using the Q&A feature on your screen and engage with other attendees via the chat during the event. Lastly, before we get started, I'd like to begin with a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Bank of America, our longstanding partner in sponsoring our Government Affairs Forum series. This is the last one of the year. So once again, thank you to Michal Chamberlain, President, Bank of America, Massachusetts, and Brian Grip, Public Policy Executive, Bank of America, and the entire team for helping bring the Chamber, allowing the Chamber to bring relevant content to our community. And we appreciate the continued support of Bank of America. And to our friends at Comcast, also thank you for helping to bring our government affairs programs to a wider audience, including making this event available via on-demand afterwards. So let's get started with today's event. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Chairman Neal has represented Massachusetts' 1st District in the United States House of Representatives since 1988. He served his first 2 terms on the House Banking Committee before joining the Ways and Means Committee in 1993. In 2019, Chairman Neal was elected to the very esteemed position of chairman, marking the first time since 1875 that a representative from Massachusetts has held this position. In addition to serving in Congress, Chairman Neal is a longtime guest lecturer at UMass Amherst and a recipient of many awards and accolades. We're thrilled to have Chairman Neal with us today. I know that he just came off the floor from voting. The House is in session and he may get called away from us again. But while we have you, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn the floor over and please everyone join me in welcoming Chairman Richard Neal.
Well, thanks, Jim, very much. And word of happy holidays to all of you that are on the call. I wish I could say that there were a lot of happy holidays just down the hallway from where I'm sitting, but we're having one of those usual end of the year dust-ups, and I anticipate I might have to step up, go and vote, but I would come back for the question and answer period. So thanks for the invitation. Very pleased to always pay great attention to the relationship I've had with the Boston Chamber. The city of Boston and the greater Boston region, they're very fortunate to have all of you as advocates. Boston is a vital driver of innovation and commerce for our entire state and as well as the nation. So I appreciate everything that the Chamber does to support the Massachusetts economy and the role you play in making sure that our workers have substantial opportunities regularly. Let me say a few words about the recent developments here in Washington. President Biden, as you know, recently signed into law bipartisan infrastructure legislation that the Congress passed. This is the first of 2 parts of his Build Back Better agenda. The infrastructure package that we voted for and the president has signed was an extraordinary piece of work. The Ways and Means Committee had enormous influence on its outcome. But when you look at the city of Boston and its growth, you can see what major infrastructure spending did over the course of more than 3 decades. And part of that would be, for sure, due to the fact that those investments were targeted to make sure that the aging infrastructure of the city was brought back to life. It's a tremendous investment as we modernize the nation's crumbling infrastructure, and Massachusetts workers and families will see improvements in our roads, highways, bridges, cleaner water, expanded broadband, mass transit, and investments in many other infrastructure priorities. Let me personally thank Jim and the Chamber because one of the most essential infrastructure investments we anticipate making with the good relationship I've had with Governor Baker is in East-West Rail. Trains connecting Boston to Worcester, Springfield, and on to Pittsfield is a top priority of mine. The money is now available to do that. It's a matter of regional equity, and it could be a game changer for local economies beyond Boston. I have raised the issue with Mayor Wu already. We had a very pleasant conversation about it, and she is very supportive of our initiative. The second piece of the agenda is what you've been hearing a lot about in recent news accounts, the Build Back Better Act. The House passed this legislation shortly before Thanksgiving, and now it's the Senate's turn to consider it. I'm really proud of this work, largely because the Ways and Means Committee wrote most of it. But before I share some of the highlights, I do want to note that the manner in which we develop these policies is significant as well. I am an adherent of the regular order. I've been here for a considerable period of time, and I know that transparency, openness, the amendment process, hearings and markups are essential to a representative democracy. We followed regular order. We held a markup for more than 40 hours. We debated more than 60 amendments with Republican colleagues. Our proposals received extensive public vetting and they earned widespread support. And importantly, they are fully paid for. I am a much substantial believer in the whole idea of the regular order. That is how legislation can and should be developed. The Ways and Means Committee in particular has been a model for using that process. Now let me go over some of the specifics that we crafted. Universal paid family and medical leave was a top priority of mine in this legislation. I want to thank the business community. They have largely been very supportive of what we've attempted to do. Our policy provides for 4 weeks of paid leave for workers who need to take time away from their jobs to care for a new child, a sick loved one, or a personal medical emergency. Now, in life's most challenging moments, folks don't need to worry about going without income. Massachusetts businesses will benefit from this as well, since the policy enables greater workforce participation and employee retention. This is good news for our economy and for the nation's global competitiveness. Ways and Means wrote a number of other provisions that support workers and businesses. For example, we reauthorized the trade adjustment assistance programs, which provide a critical lifeline to workers, firms, farmers, and communities that have been harmed by trade. We extend the expanded earned income tax credit that Congress passed earlier this year, a policy that encourages and rewards work. Massachusetts families and businesses alike felt the impact of expanded child credit opportunities, and we will continue to advance monthly payments. This support allowed people to afford life's essentials, which in turn help make local establishments stay afloat. It prevented the economy from taking an even greater hit. We also include investments in affordable housing through the historic expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, which has supported the provisions for more than 1.5 million homes to date. It substantially increases state allocations for 3 years, and it better targets the credit to investments for the most vulnerable by providing enhanced opportunities for certain projects serving extremely low-income tenants, as well as certain tribal projects. Healthcare has been a top, I think, priority for me for a long period of time. I helped to write the Affordable Care Act. Take satisfaction in Massachusetts that 100% of the children in our state are covered and 97% of the adults. We expanded beyond that for the rest of the country using the Massachusetts model as our example. We now are in the midst of a public health crisis still, and it will have direct economic consequences if we don't continue to be proactive. The pandemic only strengthened my resolve to ensure that as many people as possible have access to affordable, quality health care. In Massachusetts, we already have universal health coverage, but we can continue to bring down costs and help our fellow Americans in other parts of the country. Insurance is based on risk, and we attempt to use some governmental intervention for the private sector to manage that risk. This package extends the enhanced affordable care premium subsidies we approved in the American Rescue Package earlier this year. It closes the Medicaid coverage gap and it will allow an additional 4 million uninsured Americans to gain access to coverage. COVID-19 took a particularly devastating toll on our nation's seniors, especially nursing home residents and staff, who represent more than 1/3 of all the deaths nationwide, despite accounting for fewer than 5% of the cases. The Ways and Means Committee included provisions to invest in the foundation of nursing home care, filling much needed gaps in transparency, quality of care, and staffing to ensure nursing homes are safer and better prepared to face future public health emergencies. I can't think of another time when we've been better stationed or had the chance to appreciate the value of our healthcare workforce and the priority of needing to ensure its robust and well-trained clientele. This package contains transformational policies to expand and diversify that workforce, including a post-acute and long-term care workforces, wage subsidies, support services, and opportunities to help make these vital jobs a stepping stone to career success. We include health profession opportunity grant program opportunities, a tried and tested method for training local workers to take on needed healthcare jobs and improve their lives in the process. Participants are overwhelmingly women of color and often single parents who need help supporting their children. Finally, I'm really proud of the historic investments we made in supporting the development and deployment of green energy. Our green tax policies put us on the path to a sustainable future and have been well met by supporters and critics of these initiatives. They believe that we're on the right path. We will help to cut carbon emissions, create good, well-paying jobs in the Commonwealth, as well as across the country. As I've described, this is an ambitious package that makes major investments in our economy, workers, and families, but it is also responsible. Our committee fully funds all of these big opportunities by asking the most powerful among us to really pay just a bit more, very modest increases. I would have preferred that we had simply used rates as our target. There has been resistance to that by one member of the United States Senate. But I'm eager for the Build Back Better plan to pass the Senate, become law, and for the people and businesses in Boston and beyond to feel the positive impacts of these marvelous investments. So I'm going to look up at my staff here to get some idea of whether or not I have to get onto the floor for a quick conversation with the speaker, but I guarantee you I will come back for your questions.
Well, we take a break. I hope that people are thinking about their questions, and we'll populate them into the chat feature. Chairman Neal has obviously shared quite a bit, and I'm sure there's some things that maybe he didn't talk about that people might be interested in. So put them in the chat, and when we come back, we'll start the Q&A. Okay, welcome back to our guest speaker today, Chairman Richard Neal. We're actually speaking to Chairman Neal as action is occurring on the House floor. So, Mr. Chairman, to the extent you can share with us, what's the issue going on right now on the floor?
We are having the annual battle over spending. And while much of it is procedural, it also sort of, I think, is indicative of what's happened in the House over the last decade, 2 decades, where at one time what we would have perceived to be just the normal routine of continuing the argument and continuing the discussion over spending now is caught up in masks and caught up in mandates and caught up in vaccination rates. And I will say this with some pride, the House of Representatives has finished most of its work for the year, including, as you so eloquently pointed out, at the introductory phase of this get-together, the big positions and issues that we successfully adopted. Now, while we've completed the 12 spending bills in the House, the Senate has not. And we are trying to figure out how we can just offer what is known as a continuing resolution, meaning keeping government at current spending levels while the Senate works its will. Generally, there are 3 political parties in Congress. There are Republicans, Democrats, and appropriators. We're in the midst of a battle right now between the appropriators. So there's a couple of other little thorny issues on the side. But I think that if we can get this done today, which the Speaker just expressed her interest in doing, finishing this today, it'll take some pressure off to allow the appropriators to find a common agreement, hopefully in the next few days.
Okay. So, speaking of thorny issues, you know, it's in the news. It's December. We hear the possibility of a government shutdown. You know, what's the likelihood of that? Will that get worked out?
Yes, and that's part of what we're discussing. And you should know that for somebody who's been in Congress for the period I have, I've really come to dislike these artificial deadlines. And I think that the discussions generally start in April about spending, and they should be resolved by summer. There's no reason not to do it. We'll figure out what allocations are. They figured out what revenues are. You square that against spending priorities, and you should reach an agreement. But unfortunately, I think amplified by social media, talk radio, the cable shows, and the ideological base of the 2 political parties, it now means that the smallest disagreement becomes the largest stalemate. And it's very troubling to me, because I have found an ability over a long period of time to get big things done, not only with Democrats, but with Republicans as well.
Yeah, I mean, in all the time that we've known each other, the decades you've served, I think effectiveness is probably the word that best describes your tenure in Congress, because you certainly have gotten some things done. And your focus, one that I share on infrastructure, but particularly transportation infrastructure, on the many things we've worked on together. In fact, just in 2020, you and I co-authored an op-ed on infrastructure in Massachusetts. And you know this, the condition of Massachusetts roads and bridges continue to be rated among the worst in the country. And so that the money that's coming is quite valuable. I wanted to follow up on your remarks with a couple of questions in that area. You mentioned East-West Rail, which the Boston Chamber has supported, working with our colleagues out in Western Massachusetts, and you mentioned it as a regional equity issue. But expand a little on that in terms of the value via rail of connecting different parts of the state, particularly to the Boston economy, and what that means, to the growth, economic success, and inclusion of everyone in the Commonwealth, having a connection via rail.
Well, I think that it would take some pressure off the highway system. I have needled my friend the governor a number of times and said to him, I'd invite you to sit in traffic with me at the Cod Bridge exit during the 3 seasons of the 4-season year. And I think that improved rail, particularly from Worcester to Springfield to Pittsfield, would be a really sound investment. It would address the issue of lower housing costs, which would help Bostonians out, because the reliability of improved rail would allow people, as they do from Worcester, to drive right into Boston. And Worcester had a very substantial uptick in population. They moved to 206,000 people. And I point that out because there was a time when there was parity between Springfield and Worcester in terms of population. So for many years, Jim, I represented Grafton, Massachusetts, which has the Tufts Veterinary School. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you what an opportunity that was for people to live in Boston, commute to Grafton, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I bring that up frequently, but I do think whether it's housing costs and some of the remote relationships that have developed because of the pandemic, all of this presents a real opportunity. I want to say something else because I know you're very keen on this. As we develop this infrastructure plan now, it's extraordinary that Massachusetts, largely at my behest, they're going to have 3 members of the infrastructure committee: Steve Lynch, Seth Moulton, and Jake Auchincloss. Imagine the state that has is 14th in population. We're going to have 3 members of the committee that's going to authorize these initiatives. And they've already indicated to me that their priority is east-west rail. And at the same time, they're going to have a broad swath of opportunity to address many of the issues in the Boston area that you've discussed.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of those other priorities. I know you've spoken about them, and I know you know them like the back of your hand. Cape Cod Bridges, you mentioned the I-84 interchange. Yeah. Talk about some of those priorities around the Commonwealth.
Well, the Cape Cod Bridges, when you go over the Sagamore or the Bourne, one of the things you're struck by is the construction date on the 2 bridges, 1933 to 1935.
Older than you and me.
That's around here these days. That's okay for me to advertise. But I think that it's clear that those bridges need replacement. And let's be candid. I mean, the Big Dig for a long time, largely because of cost overruns from the time that Speaker O'Neill and Senator Kennedy authorized it, it ended up costing $22 billion, but $16 billion in principal and $6 billion in interest. But an extraordinary engineering achievement. Mm-hmm. And even for people in Western Mass and Springfield, we can now access Logan in about 80 minutes, 70 to 80 minutes. So it tells you about those greater efficiencies that were built in. Very easy now to leave Logan and head back to Western or Central Massachusetts. But I think that opportunity ought to avail itself across the entire state. So I think that enhanced opportunities in the Berkshires for more revenue expenditure, precisely that, investment. Broadband in parts of Western Mass, Central Mass, and on Cape Cod. And Governor Baker's been very helpful on those issues. So I think that where we've been able to succeed in getting the middle mile constructed, this will allow for the last mile to be constructed as it relates to broadband. So yeah, this opportunity will not avail itself again, Jim. That's the point with the infrastructure investment.
Yeah. The numbers that have been reported are that out of the infrastructure bill, Massachusetts in total, all of the various issues will get about 8 or 9 billion if the numbers are correct. But then there's other funds that you can compete for. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we specifically drafted the legislation so that those projects of great merit would have a competitive opportunity. As we've done in the past, Union Station was restored in Springfield, as you know.
Yeah.
And we did the first 80 million of it through earmarking regularly that I undertook with the help of Ted Kennedy. But the last 20 million of that was done actually by Ray LaHood, who was a friend of mine from his days in the House. He was a Republican. He was the Secretary of Transportation. And the competitive round of bidding, we simply had to demonstrate the merit of the argument. And it worked. So this is a chance, again, you can be sure that as we advertise it, as merit-based, that having three authorizers on the committee as to determine how it's spent, they're going to have considerable influence.
Yeah. I want to shift to the Build Back Better plan, and you articulated quite well all of the various elements of that. Talk about the political side of it. What happens next, and to what degree, I mean, now that you've done your work, to what degree are you able to even influence what happens next?
Well, I regularly speak with Chuck Schumer, my tax staff, which is the best on Capitol Hill. They're in regular contact with the Finance Committee tax staff. And I think that the two obstacles come at it, interestingly enough, they come at it from different perspectives, but they have the ability, because of the fact that right now all 50 members of the Senate can be president. They get to say what they want, and they get to say what they don't want about legislation. So right now, trying to get 50 votes and then moving to 51 with the vice president's support is a bit of a climb. So I think that I can't predict what the Senate will do. I think that when we began this debate, we were trying as best we could to align similar interests. That fractured based upon the fact that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema rejected the proposals. I would just say, because there's so many of you in the greater Boston area, and I know that the fondness that the state has for politics, I'll give you a suggestion that you'll be lying in bed thinking about tonight. And that is that Mike Dukakis won West Virginia. If you said that today on the House floor, nobody would believe you. That's what's happened over these since 1988. And I bring that up because I think Joe Manchin is a Democrat who has certain realities that he faces back home. But I do think that some of the opposition, based on the progress that we've offered, is a bit superficial from them. I think that we should just try to nail this thing down, get the president to sign it, and move on to the challenges of next year.
Okay. I think we have a bit of a what-if question in the chat that I'll read. Do you expect Congress to take up any tax legislation at the end of 2021 to address some expiring bipartisan provisions such as R&D expensing in the event a larger package doesn't pass by then? If so, what other policies might be included?
Well, I certainly can claim, I think, some DNA with the R&D credit. I'd like to think I'm either the father or I have some paternal interest in R&D. I've been the chief sponsor of its expansion in the House for decades. Whether or not we get it done right away, I can't suggest, but I would say that it will get done in the near future. The clock is ticking, and if we can get Build Back Better done, I think that there will still be some room. But right now, I'd be careful about any prediction that I would make. But on R&D and some of those, they will get done.
Okay. Another question that's also in a tax credit category related to $4,500 tax credit for purchases of union-made electric vehicles. Can you give us a bit more background on that and where you see that conversation going with the electric vehicles?
Well, I'm all in on electric vehicles. I think the president's correct. The committee established the credit. I think that it's been well met. There is a geographic difference of opinion in the party, the Democratic Party, over how to best accomplish it. And those conversations are still ongoing. You would have a dispute on that is from some states, and then you would have support for it in other states. But I know that the major sponsors of the competing positions, they are talking.
Okay. You know, a lot of the talk, not just in Boston and Massachusetts, but across the country, is around the current inflation rate and what's happening. You know, I'm sure you hear about it, you know, at the supermarket, at the gas pump, and so forth. I guess a multi-part question as it relates to, you know, the levers that can help with this, whether it's fiscal policy or monetary policy. Your thoughts on the drivers, as well as sort of, you know, what actions need to be taken in the short term.
Well, it's a good time for members of Congress to know what a gallon of gasoline costs. I can tell you that, or what a gallon of milk costs, that's for sure. But I also think that what we're reminded of here is that as long as history has played out, nobody has been able to reverse the law of supply and demand. And the pandemic has not been helpful. I think that I stand by what Congress did in order to, in a sense, stimulate demand. There was a difference on how the consumer proceeded to services versus goods. And I think that's been part of the challenge we have. Interestingly enough, the American consumer right now is in a pretty decent place given the assistance that we offered. It's been estimated that they're sitting on still $2.5 trillion of money that we provided to them in the 3 acts that you described earlier. I also think that because of COVID, it's hard if you are providing supplies in Malaysia and you can't get the necessary workers to get those containers on the ships headed toward the port of Boston. So that's part of reality. I think that you should know I was a supporter of Jay Powell being renominated. I thought that at this stage, continuity and competence are very, very important. And I believe that the Fed, which does a monetary policy working hand in hand with the Congress that does fiscal policy, we should be able to attempt to address some of these issues. But the Fed did indicate again yesterday that they now believe that this could be longer term than anticipated. It's important also to point out, this is not just an American problem. Europe and Asia are experiencing the same challenges that we are right now. So I hope that sound policy from the Fed, coupled with sound policy from Congress, will bring us to the brighter side.
You know, Mr. Chairman, you know, we sent down our former mayor, Marty Walsh, to be the Secretary of Labor amidst, I'd be interested in your perspective, but at least in my memory, one of the most difficult workforce shortages and inability of many industries to attract talent and hire workers. I hear it from a lot of our members and every industry, whether it's, you know, the hospitals to the construction companies, financial services and the like. I'm sure you do too. Your thoughts on that dynamic, you know, what's happening and, you know, what kinds of things can be done, not just at, you know, your level, but at different levels of government or within the business community?
Well, it's a great question. And the staff that are sitting in the room with me here, just off the floor of the chamber, they would confirm that I haunt them over labor participation rates, because that's the real story in economic life. So we have right now about 11 million jobs that go unanswered. We have up to 5 million people who still have not returned to the workforce. And part of that was COVID related. Schools closed. Women had to choose between work and caring for children. And it's a stronger position now in terms of labor demands. So I think that this will sort itself in time. But I also think that the people are in a stronger position to choose where they want to go to work right now. The last part of it, we also have in Massachusetts part of the answer too, and that is our state college system. Mm-hmm. Our community college system is amongst the best in the country, and our community colleges should be well positioned to provide people with the necessary skill set to speak to those very questions about, as I noted, labor participation rates. The unemployment rate is 4.4% nationwide, and in Massachusetts, it's in that range, but it still doesn't account for those who have left the workforce and have not immediately returned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we agree. Our community colleges, our voc ed school, as it relates to creating the pipeline of talent. Yeah. I know you've been a champion of those as well. You know, one of the as we think about the supply of workers and labor, certainly it's the homegrown, but also Massachusetts, as you know, has thrived by having a strong immigrant population at all levels. I mean, from the blue collar to the hospital, you know, professionals that take care of us. There's so many immigrants working in our economy. The flow has slowed down, and some of it has been political in terms of the way that people have characterized, you know, the immigrant population. You know, I know that there's a lot on the plate down there, but is there room for addressing immigration issues in this country?
Well, I'm the product of immigrant grandparents, and very proud of that, by the way. And I have always been in favor of more liberalized immigrant laws. I also subscribe to the idea that there has to be a plan. We cannot have people just walking over the border. The security threat is too much today. COVID crisis reminds us how difficult it is. But if the average couple now is having 1.8 children per family, which I know is physically difficult, but it makes for good statistical analysis. But that's where we find ourselves in terms of birth rates. So we're going to have to figure out how to come to grips with the reality. We're going to need a lot more workers fast if we want to expand opportunity. And still, the best way to increase productivity is to expand the workforce.
Yeah, that's for sure. So several times you've alluded to, and I've observed the way you work, and that's through relationships across the aisle, across different levels of government. You've worked with several governors in the Commonwealth, and you alluded to the things you've worked with Governor Baker on. He recently announced yesterday that he's not going to run for re-election. I guess a two-part question. One is reflect on sort of the past 7 years of working with Governor Baker, and also a couple of hundred members of the Boston business community, about a dozen members of the press. Do you want to throw your hat in the ring for Governor of Massachusetts?
I know they'd keep it secret. No, but I will say this, that I had a great relationship with him and had a great relationship with him. When I call him, he calls right back. And I think that he would say that he's very grateful for the assistance that I have personally provided to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you recall early on, the two of us did a press conference to let everybody know just what was coming in terms of revenue. I kept him fully informed as to what Congress was going to do. And the other thing I want to say about Charlie Baker that I think is a good lesson in public life today, he never used excitable language. There was no effort on his part to charge people up. And I think that his administrative abilities and the people that he surrounded himself with that were of great assistance to me and to Central and Western Massachusetts was highlighted by the fact that he knew that I saw the Ways and Means Committee chairmanship as a responsibility for America, not just for one congressional district. And the two of us worked through many of these issues time and again. So I hope that the calming effect that he had on politics will be emulated by whomever is his successor.
Your audience is mostly Eastern Massachusetts. Share with us, for those that don't sort of travel to Western Massachusetts. I mean, you've got your fingers.
Which is most of you, by the way, I can assure you.
Which is most of you. I do hear from, my friend Rick Sullivan and my friend, the mayor of Springfield, Dominic Sano, quite often.
Great people. They're really fine people.
Great people. But give us some insights into the how's it going economically. Otherwise, you've alluded to some projects that are necessary, broadband and so forth. But give us an insight.
Well, I think that one of the biggest concerns we always have is always that Boston-centric people, and this is not a criticism as much as I think that there's a tendency to look out the windows and see this thriving city, to take a look across the river to Kendall Square and to say that's the Massachusetts economy. And the reality is that in a lot of our old cities in particular, there are still monumental challenges. And I know in the eastern part of the state, if you're in Lawrence or Lowell, places like that, they have similar challenges. But we don't have the same wealth standards that Bostonians have. Now you are the center of the venture capital, quickly becoming the center of it in America. Mm-hmm. You have the success of Pfizer and Moderna in Kendall Square. You have this extraordinary startup investment that's taking place. And we'd like to expand that to the central and western parts of the state. I think that's doable. I represent one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful part of the state, the Berkshires. But the Berkshires continue to lose population. Springfield is now larger than Berkshire County. And the point that I make is that the young people are the ones that move on, pensioners stay there. So those opportunities for creativity, innovation, we'd like to see those expanded across the state. You have great research institutions in Boston. We have the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. We have great colleges, however, across the western and central parts of the state, but you have 5 teaching hospitals, 7 teaching hospitals. We have 1 in Worcester and 1 in Springfield. Now they're affiliated beyond that, but those are the sort of investments that draw NIH dollars, for example. So Massachusetts, as I noted, is the 14th largest state, 2nd largest recipient of NIH dollars in the country. Why? It's because of the ecosystem of the universities and the hospitals. So again, we'd like to see that move toward the western part of the state, which is a spectacular place to live. We don't have the sort of traffic congestion of trying to get in and out of the city that you do. I mean, I look at what happens trying to get out of Boston on a Friday afternoon when everybody wants to go to the Berkshires to see the colors in October. As I said to Governor Baker, you could be there for days, never mind hours.
Well, we have another question that came into the chat around the issue of childcare, and I know your colleague, Congresswoman Clark, has been a champion on this issue. Talk about, what's included in the legislation, but also other promising initiatives you're hearing in Washington with respect to the challenges of the workforce that we talked about earlier to be able to deal with the childcare issues.
Childcare is a priority. We included Catherine's proposal in our legislation. And I think that if we've learned any hard lessons from the pandemic, childcare has got to be near the top of the list. The minute school is closed, again, women overwhelmingly are still responsible for childcare. And they had to choose between work and childcare. And they gave up work in large measure. So that's part of that labor participation rate challenge that we have in getting them back to the workforce. So I think that we're certainly attuned to it, and I want to make sure that some of these provisions stay in whatever it is the Senate does.
Okay. You mentioned the beauty of your district, and we have the census now and conversations about redistricting, which seem to be a little more kind of acrimonious around different parts of the country than here right now. But your thoughts on how that might affect Massachusetts?
Well, one of the things I'm really proud of, and I know that reporters don't do this sort of reporting anymore, but I took the lessons that McCormick gave to O'Neill and O'Neill gave to Bulkley and Bulkley gave to this Neal. And everybody in Massachusetts has their first committee choice. Every one of them, the newest and the ones that have been around the longest, they all sit on the best committees in Congress. That's where the real work of Congress gets done. And I wish more attention was paid to that. So as we are doing this earth-shattering legislation, rivaling the Great Society, people need to pay attention to what these committee assignments mean. And I'll take that beyond because of the Dean of the New England delegation as well, Jim. Everybody in New England has their first committee choice. That augurs very well for all of us. And I think I'm getting a signal here that I have to go back to the floor and vote on another procedural matter.
Yeah, I got a message from your staff that, get you out on time. So I will close by thanking you not only for making the time that you have today, I know you're quite busy, but also for your effectiveness, for your political acumen, and for your representation of the Commonwealth over many decades. And happy holidays, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Jim. And we're going to get you out to Springfield on that rail issue again, okay?
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes today's forum, and I wish you all a happy and safe holiday season. Thank you for joining us today.